Hi everyone, I am now going to go through a short video just all about functions. Last video we talked about procedures, one type of subroutine or a subprogram, and now we'll look at functions, which are very similar. They've just got one slight difference, and one of the most common questions you might get in the exam is explain the difference between procedures and functions. Okay, so let's get cracking on and share my screen. Okay, where's Python? So if you were here for, where was I? Yeah, if you looked at the last video, we looked at procedures. Okay, so here's a very, very simple procedure which will take two numbers and display their sum. Okay, nice and simple. A bit of a recap: when you define a subprogram, the data in the brackets are called the parameters. Okay, so number one and number two are parameters of the add procedure, and these parameters are there when you define the procedure. Okay, in other words, the data required in order to do it. So in order to add two numbers, what do you need? Well, you need those two numbers. Hence we have number one and number two. When you call the procedure, okay, in other words, when you run it, the actual data you put in to the brackets there in order what you want to pass into the procedure are called arguments. Okay, and here we've used three different versions, so 46, 48, but also these could be variables. So we could have num1 equals int, oops, excuse me, my dog barking, how annoying. Enter first number of num2 the dog, naughty doggy. Enter second number. Okay, so what we could do then, in order to call the function, we'll just do add, but in this case, instead of just putting the numbers in, we put the variables in. So num1, num2. So it takes those two variables as arguments. They are then passed through to our subroutine. Okay, and then it's going to display the actual result. Let's see if it works. So it's 32 and 18, answer should be 50. There we go. Let's run it again just to prove it. Let's have 45 and 89, 134. Okay, there's a quick example of a procedure. Now, the thing about procedures is it's great, but if you're doing a complex calculation and you want to use that data again, you can't do it. Okay, so the key thing about a procedure is this result here, okay, isn't saved. Okay, you can't get it outside, you can just display it. All right, now if you wanted to use that data, that number, and maybe assign it to a variable, it wouldn't work. Okay, so let's try and see if it works or not. Let's have total equals number one plus number two. Okay, and maybe what we could do is then see if this works. Let's try that. If we did, so undo, we did that, and then we did print total. Okay, so let's break it down. We've defined our procedure. We have two parameters, number one, number two. What the procedure does, it adds those two together and assigns to the variable total. So I run the program, I then choose my two numbers, I then call my procedure, which will then put number one, number two into our procedure, work out total, and then hopefully should display total. Let's see if it works. If it works, I'm going to look like an absolute idiot. 30 plus 20. Right. Okay, let's have a look at the error message here. So it says, okay, go down. Name error, name total is not defined. Okay, so it says that on line 11, which is there. It's saying total is not defined, and you think, well, hang on, it's there. Okay, why can you not see that? It's only literally a few centimeters above your head. Now, the key thing here is when you're working with subprograms, subroutine procedures and functions, any variables you create here are local. They only exist within this subroutine. You can't use them outside. Now, there is a method to do it by declaring global variables. This was called what's called the scope of the variable. In other words, it can only be used within that particular subroutine. Okay. Now, you might have seen in another lesson this idea of using global variables, which is a way around it, but it's not a really, really good practice. What you really want to do instead is to use a function to return data, to return that back. Okay, and it's quite simple. At the moment, this is a procedure. Okay, it does that. It just works out number 1 plus number 2 and assigns to that variable total, which is then only available within that function. So what I could do print total. Okay, run that. 54 plus 65, that's fine, but that result 119 total, we can only use it within that function. If we wanted to use that data in another part of the program, we can't do it. So we just have to make a slight change to it. All we have to do then is this. We do return total. If you see that word return, it's a function. If you don't see the word return, it is a procedure. That is the key difference. Okay, so if you have an exam question and asks you, is this a procedure, is it a function? If you see the word return, it's a function. If you don't see the word return, it's a procedure. There's a simple one. Okay, now what exactly does that mean? Okay, now what that means is when you call this function here, add, okay, it's going to create that data, that number, or whatever result is total, is going to be passed back through the subroutine. Okay, now if you're getting data, just like with any sort of program, data has to be stored somewhere in a variable. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to call it. So we could call it total. Let's call it added, and that's it. So what we're doing here, we're creating a variable called added. Okay, we have an assignment statement. It takes what's to the right and assigns it to the left. What's on the right? Okay, go to the add function. Okay, put those 2 arguments in. Okay, it puts it in, it works out the total, and then it returns the total. In other words, it's going to take it and put it back into added. Print added. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, let's do 3, 4. Okay, now you're thinking, well, that's just the same as what the program did in the first instance when it's procedure. Yes, it is. But now what we've got this variable added with that data. We can do something that we can reuse it again. Okay, so that is the main difference in between a procedure and a function. A function always returns a value. Okay, a procedure does not. Okay, so let's just recap, go through again. Here we're defining the subroutine, in which case it is a function. Okay, it's called add. It has 2 parameters. It has number 1 and number 2. In other words, it requires 2 bits of data in order to add it together. Okay, this is what we wanted to do within that subroutine. Okay, take the values of number 1, number 2, add them together and assign to a variable total. Okay, then return the value of total back through the function. Okay, that's defining it. Here we have our 2 variables, fairly straightforward. Okay, here is when we call we create a variable called added, which is going to store our data. Function using num1 and num2 as arguments. They go into the subroutine, does the thing, adds them together, returns the total, which is then assigned to the variable added. Okay, let's have a look at another couple of examples. Here's one I did. Actually, I'll show you. No, I can't show you. But at school, for example, we have special initials on Go for Schools. So, for example, mine is TPR. Mr. Dixon is SDN. Let's go for Mr. Clements' MCS. So the way in which they're generated takes the first initial of the first name, the first letter of the surname, followed by the last letter of the surname. Okay, so that's how it's done. So what I've done here, I've done a function which generates that code. So I've defined the function as name code. It has two parameters. In other words, what 2 bits of data do we need in order to generate that code? Well, we need the person's first and last name. I've called them first and last. This is where it generates the code. It does a bit of string manipulation. So what that'll do, it'll take the variable first, whatever they've typed in, take the first letter, which is position 0, index 0, and the change to uppercase. Then it's going to take the first letter of the last name, change to uppercase, and then the last letter of the last name. That's what that -1 means. It means the last letter of that string, change to uppercase, and then it's going to return the code because we're going to use it again and again and again. Okay, so if it was a procedure and we just want to display it, we just print code, but this is a function. So here, this is where the user gets to type in their first and last name. This is where we're going to save that person's code. So we create a variable, we call the function, we use these two variables as our arguments. So what these do, these go up to here, they plonk it in, works out what the code is, then returns the value and puts it into user code. Let's just hash that out. That was me just playing around. Okay, let's run that, see if it works. So let's do make term bar. There you go. My code is TPR. Let's do somebody else. Who should we do? Let's do Mr. Rogers, Louis Rogers. Okay, LRS. Okay, there we go. What's that last one? Oh, there's just another example of a function. Let's have a look. So this one just does the square of a number. Okay, but this time it returns a number. So in this particular instance, I'm just displaying what the answer is, the square of 8, but we're not saving it. We could save it or assign it to a variable. Excuse my pronunciation. Okay, so there is some examples of functions. Key things to know the difference between is functions return a value, whereas procedures do not. Okay, I'm just going to end this video here, and the next video we'll be looking at typical exam questions about subroutines. Okay, so thanks for listening. See you soon.